The council chamber spanned 2 kilometers from its central podium to the outermost observation rings. Thousands of delegates representing 246 sentient species filled the tiers, their forms ranging from the towering Veth of the hydrogen-breathing worlds to the microscopic swarm intelligences that communicated through light patterns. Every seat was occupied. Every eye, sensory organ, or equivalent perception apparatus focused on the central platform. High Mediator Threx of the Ryloth Combine raised all 4 arms, commanding silence that settled across the massive space like a held breath. His carapace, polished to a deep copper sheen, reflected the chamber's golden illumination as he addressed the assembly. 246 times this council has extended welcome to a new starfaring civilization. Today marks the 247th such occasion. His voice, translated across 1,000 languages simultaneously, carried genuine warmth. The species that calls itself humanity has achieved faster-than-light travel. They have reached beyond their home system. They have found us, as we found so many before. On the observation screens, Earth rotated slowly against the black of space. Blue oceans, green continents, white cloud swirls. Nothing exceptional by galactic standards, except for the faint shimmer of orbital infrastructure that human engineers had constructed in less than 2 centuries of industrial expansion. The human delegation stood at the base of the podium, 7 individuals in simple dark blue uniforms. They looked fragile compared to the armored Ryloth guards flanking the chamber entrances. Soft bodies, no natural weapons, their senses limited to narrow bands of light and sound. By every biological metric, humanity should have been a minor addition to the galactic community, another curious species destined for peaceful obscurity. Ambassador Helena Voss stepped forward. Her gray hair was pulled back severely from a face that had seen 70 Earth years, including the final unification wars that had ended just before her birth. Her ancestors had fought in those conflicts. Her grandchildren would learn about them in history classes. But the scars remained, passed down through stories and bones and the chemical residue of generational trauma. High Mediator, esteemed delegates. Her voice carried no tremor. On behalf of the United Human Governments, I thank you for this honor. Humanity has dreamed of the stars for 10,000 of our years. We have written stories about the beings we might find there. Some of those stories were hopeful, some were cautionary. All of them were, in retrospect, insufficient. A ripple of amused murmurs passed through the chamber. The Thascian delegation, a species of aquatic beings who experienced emotion through color shifts, pulsed a pleased lavender. The council loved humble newcomers. Humble newcomers signed treaties. Humble newcomers accepted their place in the established order. Threx smiled, showing the double rows of grinding plates that served his species as teeth. Ambassador Voss, your people have much to learn about the galaxy, but you will find that the Council exists to guide younger species through the challenges of interstellar civilization. There are protocols, there are alliances, there are protections. You are no longer alone. The human ambassador returned the smile. Hers did not show teeth, but something in her posture shifted, a minute adjustment that made the Ryloth guards shift their weight onto their rear legs, a survival instinct they could not explain. We appreciate the offer of protection, High Mediator, but humanity has a few questions first about how those protections have worked for other council members. The celebration continued around her, oblivious to the change in temperature. Delegates toasted with various liquids. Music from a dozen worlds swelled through the speakers. New friendships were being formed, trade routes imagined, cultural exchanges planned. On the orbital feed, the human exploration vessel adjusted its position relative to the Council fleet. 800 meters of gray hull, unremarkable in profile, unremarkable in emissions, unremarkable in every way that Council sensors could measure. But the ship's commander, a woman named Reyes who had spent 30 years building this moment, watched the celebration feed from her bridge. She counted the seconds until the ambassador gave the signal. Captain, her tactical officer said, passive sensors have identified all Council fleet command nodes. Weapons tracking is locked. They have no idea. Reyes nodded. They will. The celebration lasted 3 standard cycles. Delegates feasted, exchanged gifts, and recorded congratulatory messages for their homeworlds. Human cultural attachés performed music, demonstrated art, and answered endless questions about Earth's history. Everything proceeded exactly as the Council expected. Junior Aide Vurin of the Thashan delegation was not celebrating. The young analyst had drawn the undesirable assignment of reviewing humanity's military disclosure documents, a standard requirement for new member species. Every civilization provided data on their defensive capabilities. Most were laughable by Council standards. Kinetic weapons, fusion explosives, perhaps a few primitive energy projectors. Nothing that threatened the established military hierarchy. Vurin's color shifted to confused amber as she worked through the files. Her species changed hue based on emotional state, and the data streaming across her display was producing emotions she could not reconcile. Humanity claimed to possess no warships. Their disclosure listed only exploration vessels, cargo haulers, and scientific platforms. The largest weapon systems were rated for asteroid defense, with yields that could not possibly threaten a shielded military vessel. But the numbers did not align. Vurin pulled up humanity's industrial output figures, their energy consumption statistics, their refined material production rates. The raw capacity was there, enormous in scale, but the military allocation showed as near zero. The discrepancy was mathematically impossible unless humanity was either lying or hiding something fundamental about their capabilities. She swam through the data again, her aquatic form propelling her through the tank that served as the Thashan delegation's workspace. The numbers refused to resolve. Too much production, too little military spending. The gap suggested a fleet larger than the Council's combined forces, but such a thing was impossible. No new species emerged with that kind of power. The Council's entire structure relied on that impossibility. Vurin composed a query and sent it to the human delegation's office. A request for clarification. Standard procedure. She expected a response within a standard cycle, probably some explanation about accounting differences or translation errors. The response arrived in 4 minutes. Ambassador Voss herself appeared at the Thashan delegation's workspace, accompanied by 2 human security officers. Their movements were economical, precise, like beings who had mapped every possible threat vector in the room before entering. Aide Vurin, Voss said, "You found something interesting." Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with a weight that made the water in Vurin's tank feel suddenly cold. Yes, Ambassador. The military expenditure figures don't match your industrial capacity. There appears to be a significant discrepancy. Voss nodded slowly. There is no discrepancy. You're seeing exactly what we intended you to see. But the fact that you noticed suggests you're more capable than most of your colleagues. Vurin's color shifted to warning orange. I don't understand. The ambassador turned to look through the tank's transparent wall at the celebration still ongoing in the main chamber. Delegates laughed and sang, and congratulated themselves on another peaceful integration. Tell me, Aide, how does the Council enforce its rulings when a member species refuses to comply? Vurin hesitated. The question was not difficult, but something about the way Voss asked it made the answer feel dangerous. The Council maintains a peacekeeping fleet. If diplomatic measures fail, the fleet can be deployed to compel compliance. And has that ever happened? 12 times in Council history, most recently against the Veth Empire 200 years ago. How long did that conflict last? Vurin pulled the data from her personal archive. 3 standard cycles. The Veth fleet was neutralized within 1. The remaining 2 cycles were devoted to occupation and restructuring. Voss turned back to face her. 3 cycles. That's how long it took the Council to defeat the second most powerful military in the galaxy. Correct. And how long would it take the Council to defeat humanity? Vurin's color drained to pale gray, the Thashan equivalent of blood running cold. She understood now. She understood everything: the discrepancy, the impossible numbers, the way Voss looked at her like a teacher watching a student solve a difficult equation. "I cannot answer that question without more data." "Yes, you can. You're just afraid to say it out loud." Voss leaned closer to the tank's wall. "So let me help you. The Council's peacekeeping fleet would engage human forces and would immediately discover that every tactical assumption they made was wrong. Their weapons would fail. Their communications would collapse. Their command structure would dissolve into chaos. And then, when they tried to retreat, they would find that humanity had already positioned assets to block every escape vector. The entire conflict would last approximately. How long would you estimate aid?" Varen forced herself to answer. "Less than one cycle." "Less than 1 hour," Voss corrected. "The Veth didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because the Council waited until they were already at war before deploying forces. Humanity does not wait. Humanity prepares." The ambassador straightened her uniform and smoothed a wrinkle that Varen's amphibian eyes could not perceive. "Now then, please inform High Mediator Threx that I request an emergency session of the Council. There's something I need to show everyone." The emergency session convened with none of the warmth that had characterized the celebration. Delegates filed into their seats carrying confusion and irritation in equal measure. Interrupting the first contact festivities was a breach of protocol so severe that many assumed some disaster had struck: a plague, a spatial anomaly, an attack by one of the minor powers beyond Council space. When Ambassador Voss took the central podium alone, without the rest of her delegation, the chamber's ambient noise faded to near silence. "Esteemed delegates, I apologize for the disruption. What I am about to say cannot wait for formal procedures. It cannot be softened through diplomatic channels or buried beneath layers of bureaucratic processing. The galaxy is changing, and you need to understand how profoundly." High Mediator Threx's primary arms crossed over his chest, while his secondary arms gripped the edge of his elevated platform. "Ambassador, this is highly irregular. The Council has protocols for—" "The Council has protocols for managing weaker species," Voss interrupted. "For controlling access to technology. For maintaining a hierarchy that ensures Ryloth and the other founding members never face a threat they cannot contain. Those protocols work beautifully when the new species arrives with weapons that cannot penetrate your shields, ships that cannot match your speed, and economies that cannot compete with your established trading blocks." She paused, letting the weight of her next word settle across the chamber. "But what happens when a species arrives with none of those limitations?" On the observation screens, the human exploration vessel began to change. Hull panels retracted along precise geometric lines, revealing weapon emplacements that had been hidden beneath standard plating. Energy signatures spiked across every sensor band as power cores that had been running at 5% capacity surged to operational levels. The ship's true dimensions became visible as false hull sections fell away. 800 meters became 2,000. 2,000 became 5,000. The vessel unfolding in high orbit was not an exploration ship. It was not a cargo hauler or a scientific platform. It was a dreadnought. Council sensor officers shouted warnings across their networks. Fleet commanders demanded explanations. Defense systems that had been on standby status scrambled to full combat readiness, but it was already too late. The dreadnought had positioned itself at the precise gravitational node that controlled access to the entire system. Every approach vector, every escape route, every tactical advantage belonged to the humans, and they had claimed it while the Council celebrated. Threx rose from his seat, all 4 arms extended in a gesture of shock his species had not used for centuries. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot. The Council will not. This is an act of war." "It is an act of introduction," Voss replied. "You wanted to meet humanity. Here we are." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted accusations and demands. Some species began evacuating their diplomatic personnel. Others locked down their sections of the Council complex, preparing for a siege. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what their senses were telling them. A human female had just stood before the most powerful assembly in the galaxy and revealed a weapon capable of destroying everything they had built. And she was still talking. "The Council has existed for 12,000 years, Voss continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. In that time, you have encountered 246 spacefaring species. You have integrated them into your systems, regulated their development, and ensured that no single civilization could challenge the established order. It is an impressive achievement. It is also a fragile one." She activated a holographic display showing the Council's military deployments. Red dots marked fleet positions across the galaxy. Blue dots marked human vessels that Council sensors had identified during the initial contact period. There were far more blue dots than the Council had detected. Every species you've encountered reached the stars through gradual technological progression. They developed FTL, expanded to nearby systems, and eventually made contact with your borders. Humanity did not follow that path. We reached the stars through desperation, through the wreckage of wars that nearly ended our species. We did not develop technology in peaceful laboratories. We forged it in fire, tested it in blood, and refined it through suffering you cannot imagine. The holographic display shifted to show Earth's history compressed into minutes. Wars, plagues, environmental collapse, near-extinction events followed by recoveries followed by new disasters. The Council watched humanity's homeworld burn and rebuild and burn again, each cycle producing harder, sharper, more dangerous survivors. "When we finally reached the stars," Voss said, "we did not find a Council waiting to welcome us. We found silence, empty space, the ruins of civilizations that had risen and fallen before we learned to walk upright. And we asked ourselves, what happened to them? What force could wipe out species that had endured for millions of years?" The display shifted again, showing the borders of Council space expanding over time, absorbing territory, absorbing species, absorbing power. "We found the answer," Voss continued. "The Council didn't destroy those civilizations. It didn't need to. It simply incorporated them, regulated them, and ensured they never became threats. The Council is not a peacekeeping organization. It is a cage, a beautiful, comfortable, carefully maintained cage." Threx's voice emerged as a guttural roar. "You know nothing of our governance. You have been here for 3 cycles. You have not seen the trade agreements, the cultural exchanges, the mutual defense pacts that—" "I have seen the Veth Empire." The chamber went silent. "The Veth," Voss said, "were the second most powerful military in the galaxy. They had their own alliances, their own trade networks, their own cultural achievements. And when they refused to accept Council authority, you destroyed their fleet in 3 cycles and spent 2 more restructuring their entire civilization to ensure compliance. The Veth are still a Council member, but they are not the Veth anymore. They are what you made them." She turned to face the Veth delegation directly. Their four-armed forms hunched low, their copper carapaces dulled to a sickly bronze. They did not meet her eyes. They did not need to. Everyone in the chamber knew the truth of what she was saying. "So here is the question the Council has never had to answer," Voss said, spreading her arms wide. "What happens when a species arrives that cannot be caged, that has already survived its own destruction, that looks at your fleets and sees not overwhelming force, but a tactical problem with a solution?" On the orbital feed, the Dreadnought's main weapon systems powered up, not targeting anything, not firing, just proving they could. "What happens," Ambassador Voss whispered, "when humanity says no?" The Council's military command center operated on lower levels beneath the main chamber, protected by armor plating, designed to survive a direct hit from a supernova's radiation pulse. Fleet Commander Vorath of the Ryloth Combine had served in that bunker for 40 years, directing peacekeeping operations across 10,000 light-years of Council space. He had never faced a situation without a protocol. Today he faced 3. "Confirm those weapon classifications," he ordered, his primary hand stabbing at sensor displays while his secondary hands coordinated fleet movements. "I want yields, ranges, recharge rates, and tactical vulnerabilities. The lead sensor analyst, a Yathel whose crystalline growth patterns shifted with computational load, responded without looking up from his station. Commander, the readings are anomalous. Human weapons appear to operate on principles we do not recognize. Their primary battery shows energy signatures consistent with zero-point extraction, but the containment method defies known physics. If those readings are accurate. If they are accurate, one human dreadnought could engage the entire Council fleet and achieve a 94% probability of victory. Voreth's carapace lost its luster, a sign of stress his species could not control. That is impossible. No new species emerges with that capability. The technological gap alone. The gap only exists because the Council has carefully controlled technology distribution for 12,000 years. The Yathel finally turned, his crystalline face reflecting Voreth's own horror back at him. Humanity did not receive technology from the Council. They developed it themselves, and they developed it under conditions no Council species has experienced. Voreth demanded the data. The Yathel provided it. Earth's recorded history stretched back 4 billion years, but the relevant portion covered only the last 10,000. Human civilization had risen and fallen with terrible frequency. Empires that spanned continents collapsed into chaos. Scientific breakthroughs were lost and rediscovered and lost again. The Industrial Revolution, which had taken Council species centuries to achieve, occurred on Earth in less than 100 years. The transition from planetary warfare to spaceflight took 50. The development of FTL travel, which Council species typically achieved after 2,000 years of peaceful space exploration, emerged from human desperation in less than 200. The first human FTL drive had been built during a resource war that threatened to return their species to pre-industrial technology. They had not reached for the stars because they were curious. They had reached because staying home meant extinction. Voreth read the reports in mounting horror. The human homeworld was classified as a death world by every galactic standard, though the official term had been banned from this narrative. Extreme gravity, unstable geology, a star that fluctuated in output, an atmosphere that encouraged aggressive mutation, a biosphere where every living thing had evolved to compete, consume, and destroy. Humanity had not merely survived that environment, they had mastered it. Then they had turned their mastery on each other. Commander, another analyst called out, I am detecting additional human vessels entering the system, multiple signatures. They were hiding behind the gas giant's gravity well, using the planet's emissions to mask their approach. How many? 47 ships, all matching the Dreadnought profile, all armed to equivalent standards. Voreth's secondary hands clenched so hard his claws drew fluid from his palms. 47 dreadnoughts. Even if the initial estimates were wrong by a factor of 10, 47 ships of that class could shatter the Council's peacekeeping fleet in a single engagement. What do they want? He whispered. The Yathel answered. That is the wrong question, Commander. The correct question is, what are they willing to do? Up in the main chamber, Ambassador Voss was answering that question for the civilian delegates. Humanity does not seek war, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. If we sought war, this conversation would not be happening. The Dreadnought would simply fire. Your fleets would die in orbit. Your command centers would lose contact with each other. And within one standard cycle, every Council world would receive the same message. Surrender or follow the Veth into submission. A Thashan delegate pulsed panic red. Then why are you here? Why show us your weapons if you do not intend to use them? Voss walked to the edge of the podium, close enough that the Ryloth guards could have reached her in 3 strides. They did not move. Something in the human's posture told them that 3 strides would be 3 steps too many. We are here because the Council's way of doing things is broken. You have created a galaxy where species either accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy or they are crushed. There is no room for equality. There is no room for genuine partnership. There is only control, enforced by the threat of violence. She pointed to the Veth delegation. These beings once ruled 1,000 worlds. They had art, science, philosophy, music, a civilization 10,000 years old, and you took it from them because they asked for something you were not willing to give. What did they ask for? A delegate called out. Voss did not look away from the Veth. They asked to be treated as equals. The Veth ambassador, a female whose carapace had lost its luster decades ago, finally raised her head. Her voice emerged as a dry whisper. We asked for a single vote, not more than the founding members, just equal to them. The council refused. When we continued to advocate for reform, they declared us a threat to stability. 3 cycles later, our fleet burned. She looked at Voss with eyes that held no gratitude, only exhausted recognition. You are not saving us, human. You are using our suffering to justify your own aggression. Voss nodded, accepting the rebuke. You are correct. I'm not saving anyone, I'm offering a choice. The council can continue as it always has, and humanity will become what it has always been, the end of every hierarchy that cannot adapt. Or the council can change, truly change. Not cosmetic reforms, not new protocols that preserve the same power structures. Change that makes every species, from the oldest founding member to the newest arrival, equal before the law. Threx had returned to his seat, his 4 arms folded across his chest in a gesture his species used to contain rage. And if we refuse? Voss smiled. It was not a predator's smile. It was something worse. The expression of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. Then we will show you what humanity does when there are no more diplomatic options. The Dreadnought's active scan rolled across the council fleet like a wave across still water. Every ship in the system detected it simultaneously. The pulse of energy washed over hulls, penetrated shields, and mapped internal systems with precision that should have required hours of passive observation. The humans completed it in 3 seconds. Then the jamming began. Council communications networks, designed with redundant pathways and hardened frequencies, collapsed in cascading failure. The human jamming algorithms had been tailored specifically to exploit gaps in council transmission protocols, gaps that should have been classified, should have been unknown to any outside species, should have been impossible for first contact civilization to discover. Someone on the human delegation had spent years studying council communications. Someone had found the weaknesses. Someone had built weapons to exploit them. Fleet Commander Voreth watched his tactical displays go dark one by one. The Dreadnought was not firing. It was not moving toward council positions. It was simply asserting dominance, showing the council what it could do without doing anything permanent. Activate emergency frequency bands, he ordered. Use the quantum entanglement array. They cannot jam that. A pause, then the communications officer's voice, thin with fear. Commander, the entanglement array is offline. Someone accessed the maintenance protocols and disabled the primary entanglement nodes. The access credentials belong to the Veth delegation. Voreth turned to face the Veth ambassador, who had not moved from her seat in the main chamber. You betrayed us. The Veth female did not deny it. The humans offered us something the council never did. They offered us a chance to be what we were before you broke us. You will pay for this. Every Veth world will. What will you do, Commander? She interrupted. Destroy our fleet. You already did that. Restructure our government. You already did that. Reprogram our children to forget their history. You already did that too. There is nothing left for you to take from us. But there is something we can give the humans. She turned to face the main chamber, her voice rising to address every delegate present. The council has ruled through fear for 12,000 years. You have told yourselves that your control maintains peace, that without your guidance younger species would destroy themselves and each other. But the Veth did not ask for destruction. We asked for equality, and you showed us what equality costs. The chamber's ambient lighting flickered as the Dreadnought's scan completed its second pass. This time, the pulse carried a data payload, humanity's terms, delivered directly into every council ship's computer core. Voreth read the terms on his emergency backup display. They were simple, brutally simple. 1. The Council would dissolve its current hierarchy immediately. Every species, regardless of when they achieved spaceflight, would hold equal voting power. 2. The peacekeeping fleet would be placed under joint command, with no single species holding veto authority over military action. 3. The technology restrictions that had kept younger species dependent on Council guidance would be eliminated. Every civilization would have access to the same knowledge, the same tools, the same opportunities. 4. Humanity would join the Council not as a member, but as a guarantor. The Dreadnought and its sister ships would remain in service, not to enforce human will, but to ensure the Council never again abused its power. The fourth term was the one that would break them. The humans were not asking for a seat at the table. They were demanding to become the table. Up in the main chamber, Ambassador Voss waited through the silence that followed her ultimatum. She did not pace. She did not check her chronometer. She stood at the podium with the stillness of a being who had placed her pieces on the board and now waited for her opponent to realize the game was already over. High Mediator Threx finally spoke, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth. You understand that we cannot accept these terms. The Council has existed for 12 millennia. Our laws, our traditions, our entire civilization is built on the principles you are demanding we abandon. I understand, Voss replied. I also understand that the Council has changed before. When the swarm intelligences joined, you rewrote your communication protocols. When the hydrogen breathers demanded representation, you redesigned the chamber's atmospheric systems. You have always adapted when the alternative was worse. And you believe your alternative is worse than accepting these demands. Voss did not answer immediately. She looked up at the observation screens, where the Dreadnought hung against the stars like a promise carved from metal and fire. I believe, she said slowly, that the Council has forgotten why it exists. You are not always the masters of the galaxy. Once you were the newcomers. Once you asked older species to accept you as equals, and they refused, so you fought. You bled, you died, and eventually you became what you once hated, the gatekeepers, the controllers, the ones who decide who rises and who falls. She turned back to face Threx. Humanity has made that same journey. We have been the oppressed and the oppressor, often at the same time. We have built empires and watched them crumble. We have committed atrocities and been victims of atrocities. And out of all that suffering, we learned one truth that your Council has forgotten. The chamber held its breath. Power does not corrupt, Voss said. Power reveals. Give a being the ability to harm others without consequence, and you will see exactly what that being truly is. The Council has held that power for 12,000 years. Humanity has seen what you are. She activated her final display. The images that appeared showed Council peacekeeping operations across the last millennium. Species forced to accept unfavorable trade agreements. Governments destabilized when they resisted Council authority. Whole civilizations reshaped to serve Ryloth interests. This is what you are, Voss repeated, and this is why you cannot be trusted with power any longer. On the orbital feed, the Dreadnought's weapon systems powered down. The jamming ceased. Communications returned. The Council fleet could move again, could fight again, could resist. But no one gave the order. Because everyone in that chamber, from the lowest aide to the High Mediator himself, understood the truth that Ambassador Voss had just revealed. The humans had already won. The weapons were irrelevant. The demonstration was irrelevant. The ultimatum was irrelevant. What mattered was the footage now broadcasting to every Council world, every subject species, every being who had ever wondered why the galaxy worked the way it did. The Council's secrets were exposed. Their crimes were laid bare, and the beings they had ruled for 12,000 years were watching. Now, Voss said, you have a choice, not between accepting our terms or fighting. That choice is already made. You cannot fight us. You cannot hide from your own people. What you must decide is how you will be remembered. as tyrants who fell to a younger species, or as leaders who saw the error of their ways and chose to build something better. Threx's 4 arms fell to his sides. His carapace lost the last of its copper luster, fading to a dull gray that matched the Veth ambassadors. "You have destroyed us," he whispered. "No," Voss replied. "We have saved you from yourselves. The destruction was your own doing. We are simply the ones who made you look at it." The council did not vote. Voting would have required acknowledging that a choice existed, that the humans had presented a genuine alternative to continued resistance. Instead, the delegates sat in their seats and waited for someone else to move first. High Mediator Threx broke first. "What do you actually want?" His voice carried no bluster now, no diplomatic warmth, no carefully constructed authority. Just exhaustion from a being who had watched his life's work crumble in less than an hour. Ambassador Voss stepped away from the podium and walked to the center of the chamber floor. The Ryloth guards had withdrawn to the walls, their weapons lowered, their postures uncertain. They had trained to fight enemies they could see. They had no protocols for this. "I told you what we want: equality, transparency, accountability, the same things every species in this chamber wants but has been too afraid to demand." "Those are concepts," Threx said. "Not demands, not concrete actions. Tell me exactly what you expect the Council to do right now in this moment to satisfy humanity." Voss nodded as if she had been waiting for exactly this question. "First, you will issue a public acknowledgement of the Council's role in suppressing the Veth and other species who resisted your authority. No euphemisms, no diplomatic language. You will state clearly that the Council used military force to maintain an unequal power structure." The chamber's ambient temperature seemed to drop. Delegates who had been whispering fell silent. "Second, you will release all technology restrictions immediately. Every species in Council space will have access to the same knowledge base as the founding members. No more controlled distribution. No more keeping younger civilizations dependent on your guidance." Threx's secondary arms twitched. "That knowledge includes weapons technology. You are asking us to arm every species in the galaxy." "I am asking you to stop disarming them. There is a difference." "Third," Voss continued, "you will dissolve the current peacekeeping fleet structure and replace it with a joint command. Every species contributes forces. Every species holds veto power over military action. No more unilateral Ryloth control of galactic security." The Thashan delegate pulsed a deep blue, the color of radical agreement. Other species shifted in their seats, some with fear, some with hope, some with the dawning realization that the galaxy was about to become far more dangerous for everyone. "Fourth, humanity will take a permanent seat on the Council with full voting rights. We will not be subject to the waiting periods or technology restrictions applied to other new members. We are here now, and we are here to stay." Threx's primary hands gripped the edge of his platform. "You said you did not want a seat at the table. You said you wanted to become the table." "I lied, not about the power structure that will change as I've described. But humanity does not trust the Council to reform itself without oversight, so we will provide that oversight, directly, personally, every day for as long as it takes." A delegate from one of the minor founding species spoke up, her voice trembling. "And if we refuse, not because we want to keep our power, but because we genuinely fear what will happen. The galaxy is not a kind place. The Council's restrictions were not purely selfish. We have kept younger species from weapons they could not control, from technologies that could destroy them, from knowledge that had destroyed civilizations before them." Voss turned to face the speaker. "I know, I have read your historical archives. I have seen the ruins of species that reached too far too fast and burned themselves out. The Council's restrictions were not evil. They were paternalistic, condescending, and ultimately self-serving, but they were not evil." She paused. "They were also unnecessary. The species that destroyed themselves did so because they lacked something humanity has in abundance. We have already destroyed ourselves. Multiple times. The weapons you fear giving to others we built in our pre-industrial age. The technologies you restrict we developed in secret laboratories while fighting wars for survival. The knowledge you control we earned through suffering that would have broken any council species. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. You are afraid of what younger species will do with power, but you are more afraid of what they will do without it. Without power, they are dependent on you. Without power, they must accept your terms. Without power, they cannot demand equality. Voss walked back to the podium and placed both hands on its surface. Humanity is offering you a way out of that fear. Give everyone the same tools. Give everyone the same knowledge. Give everyone the same opportunities. And then trust that most species will choose creation over destruction, cooperation over conflict, growth over stagnation. And if they don't, Threx asked, then we will deal with them. That is what humanity does. We deal with problems. We do not hide from them. We do not control them. We do not spend 12,000 years building elaborate systems to avoid facing the hard questions. She smiled again, and this time there was something almost gentle in it. You have been the galaxy's parents for too long. You have protected your children from every scraped knee and broken heart. But children do not learn by being protected. They learn by falling. They learn by failing. They learn by making mistakes and fixing them. She gestured to the observation screens, where the Dreadnought still hung against the stars. We are not your children. We are not your students. We are not your subjects. We are the species that survived its own worst impulses and emerged with a single understanding that your council never achieved. And what is that? Threx asked. That no one can be trusted with power, not the council, not humanity, not any species anywhere at any time. Power must always be checked, must always be balanced, must always be watched by those who have nothing to gain from its abuse. She turned to face the Veth delegation. The Veth asked for equality and were crushed. The Thasians asked for representation and were ignored. The swarm intelligences asked for recognition and were dismissed. Every species that has ever questioned council authority has been silenced, one way or another. She turned back to Threx. No more. The chamber held its breath. Threx's carapace flickered between gray and copper, as his internal conflict played out across his shell. Finally, his color settled on a muted bronze, not the bright copper of confidence, not the dull gray of defeat, but something in between. You have given us no time to think, he said. No time to consult our governments. No time to prepare our populations for the changes you demand. We have given you 12,000 years, Voss replied. You chose to spend them building walls instead of bridges. The time for preparation ended when humanity arrived. She opened her arms wide. So what will it be, High Mediator? Will the Council learn to share, or will you force us to demonstrate why sharing is the only rational choice? The fracture came from within. Not from the Ryloth delegates, who stood frozen between their pride and their fear. Not from the Thasians, who pulsed with conflicting colors as their democratic instincts warred with their survival programming. Not even from the minor species who had spent millennia hopping for exactly this moment. The fracture came from the Veth. Ambassador Vethan, the same female who had spoken earlier about her species' destruction, rose from her seat and walked to the center of the chamber. Her carapace, which had been dull bronze for 200 years, began to brighten. Not to the copper of Ryloth dominance, but to a warm gold that no Veth had displayed since the Council broke them. High Mediator, she said, the Veth Empire accepts humanity's terms. Threx's primary arms shot forward in denial. You cannot accept. You are not the Veth Empire. The Veth Empire no longer exists. You are a council member bound by council protocols, subject to council. We are the Veth Empire, Vethan interrupted. We have always been the Veth Empire. You suppressed our government. You dismantled our military. You rewrote our history to make us forget. But you could not erase what we are. You could only make us hide it. She turned to face the other delegates. her golden carapace gleaming under the chamber's lights. For 200 years we have waited. We have watched the Council grow more comfortable in its power. We have seen other species suffer the same fate we suffered, and we have done nothing because we had nothing to do with. No ships, no weapons, no allies willing to risk Council retaliation. She pointed to Ambassador Voss. Then humanity came, not as saviors, they made that clear. They came as what they are, survivors who recognized other survivors. They did not offer to fight our battles. They offered us the tools to fight our own battles. And we took those tools. Every Veth world, every Veth colony, every Veth being who remembered what we were before the Council broke us. Threx's color drained to gray. What have you done? Vethan smiled, and the expression was terrible in its joy. We have rebuilt, in secret, in the cracks the Council left behind when it reshaped our civilization. We built shipyards in asteroid fields. We trained crews in hidden caverns. We raised children who know their true history, who know what the Council took from us, who know what we must become to take it back. She raised her primary arms to the ceiling. The Veth fleet will be at humanity's side when this Council makes its decision, not because humanity commands us, not because we owe them a debt, but because the galaxy cannot wait another 12,000 years for justice. On the orbital feed, new contacts appeared, ships emerging from FTL at the system's edge, not human vessels, something older, something angrier, something that had been waiting for 200 years to return. The Veth fleet numbered 300 ships, not as advanced as the Dreadnought, not as powerful as the Council's peacekeeping force, but present, choosing a side, breaking the illusion that the Council's power was absolute. Voreth watched the new arrivals on his restored tactical display. His hands trembled, not from fear, though fear was there, from something he could not name, the understanding that the galaxy had changed in ways his training had not prepared him to face. Commander, his sensor analyst said, the Veth ships are targeting our fleet. Not firing, just targeting. They want us to know they could. They want us to know they will, Voreth replied, if we force them to. Up in the main chamber, other delegations began to move. The Thasians pulsed a determined orange and joined the Veth on the chamber floor. The swarm intelligences flickered patterns of agreement. One by one, species that had suffered under Council authority rose from their seats and walked to stand with the beings who had finally given them permission to hope. Within 10 minutes, half the chamber had crossed the floor. Threx looked at the remaining delegates, the Ryloth, their closest allies, and the species who had benefited too much from the old order to risk change. They were outnumbered now, not in military terms, perhaps, but in the only terms that would matter when the history of this day was written. You have broken the Council, he said to Voss. The Council was already broken, she replied. We simply showed everyone the cracks. She walked to where Threx stood, close enough that the guards could have reached her, close enough that the High Mediator could have struck her. She did not flinch. Here is the truth you do not want to hear, Threx. The Council cannot continue, not because humanity threatens it, not because the Veth have returned, because the beings who built this chamber, who wrote these protocols, who created this hierarchy, they are dead. Their children do not remember why the rules were made. Their grandchildren do not believe in the purpose behind them. What remains is a machine running on momentum, crushing anyone who gets in its way because it no longer knows how to do anything else. She placed a hand on his primary arm. He tensed but did not pull away. You have a chance to end this peacefully, to be remembered as the leader who chose reform over destruction, not because you are weak, because you are strong enough to admit that the old ways have failed. Threx looked at her hand on his arm, at the Veth fleet on the screens, at the delegates who had abandoned his side, at the species who remained with him, waiting for his decision. What would you have me do? He asked. Call for a vote, Voss said. A real vote, every species equal voice. Let the Council decide its own fate. And if the vote goes against you, then we will accept the result, and so will the Veth, And so will every species that crossed this floor today. We will take our case to the galaxy and let the people decide, but we will not fire a single shot. Not today. Not unless you fire first. Threx closed his eyes. His carapace flickered through a dozen colors as his mind raced through possibilities, outcomes, scenarios that could save something from the wreckage of his life's work. When he opened his eyes again, his color had settled on a steady, dull copper. Not the bright sheen of power, just metal, just a being who had done his best and found his best insufficient. "Call the vote," he said. The vote took 3 hours. Not because the outcome was in doubt. Every delegate in that chamber knew which way the numbers would fall. The 3 hours were consumed by procedure, by speeches that would be quoted for generations, by last-minute attempts to amend terms, soften demands, preserve something of the old order. Ambassador Voss sat through it all without visible emotion. She had done her work. The pieces had moved. Now she watched the board settle into its new configuration. The final tally: 173 in favor of humanity's terms, 43 opposed, 31 abstaining. The council had voted to dissolve itself. Not literally, of course. The institution would continue. Too many treaties, too many trade agreements, too many shared systems depended on its existence. But the power structure that had governed the galaxy for 12,000 years ended in that moment, with a vote that no one could challenge because everyone had participated. High Mediator Threx announced the result in a voice stripped of its former authority. The Council accepts the terms presented by humanity. Effective immediately, all technology restrictions are lifted. The peacekeeping fleet will be restructured under joint command, and every species in Council space will hold equal voting power. He paused, looking at Voss with eyes that held no anger, only exhausted acceptance. Humanity will take its seat as a full member of this body, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. The Veth Empire will be restored to its former status as an independent civilization, and the galaxy will change. The chamber erupted, not with the polite applause of diplomatic ceremony but with genuine noise. Delegates shouted questions, congratulations, warnings, demands. Some wept, some laughed, some simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what had just happened. Voss walked to the Veth ambassador and extended her hand. "Congratulations, Ambassador Vethan, the war is over." Vethan took the hand, her golden carapace shining bright enough to light the space between them. "The war is never over, human. You know this. You have the same scars we do. Then the battle is over, for now. We'll take the victories we can get." The two women stood together as the chamber swirled around them. Old enemies becoming new allies becoming something neither had words for yet. High Mediator Threx found Voss 3 hours later, after the delegates had returned to their quarters and the chamber had emptied. She stood alone at the observation window, watching the Dreadnought maintain its position above the Council homeworld. "You never intended to fire those weapons," he said. "It was not a question." Voss did not turn around. "Correct." The demonstration, the jamming, the threats, all of it was theater. All of it was necessary. You would not have listened otherwise. None of you would have listened. You had too much invested in the old system, too much pride, too much fear of what would happen if you admitted it had failed. Threx moved to stand beside her, his 4 arms folded behind his back. "And now, what happens now that we have admitted it?" "Now the hard work begins. Building something new is always harder than tearing something down. You'll face rebellions from species who like the old way. Power struggles as everyone adjusts to their new status. Conflicts that the Council used to suppress will resurface because no one is suppressing them anymore." That sounds like a nightmare. It is a nightmare. It is also the only way forward. The Council's peace was a lie. It was peace bought at the price of freedom, equality, justice. That kind of peace does not last. It only postpones the inevitable collapse. Voss finally turned to face him. Her eyes held no triumph, no satisfaction, just the same exhaustion that had settled into Threx's bones. Humanity could have conquered you. We had the fleet. We had the weapons. We had the element of surprise. We could have shattered the Council in a single battle and claimed the galaxy for ourselves. Why didn't you? Because we have been conquerors before. We have ruled empires. We have crushed weaker civilizations. And every time it ended the same way: rebellion, collapse, generations of suffering followed by generations of recovery. We learned that lesson the hard way. We bled that lesson into our soil for thousands of years. She gestured to the Dreadnought. That ship is not a weapon of conquest. It is a weapon of last resort. It exists to ensure that no one, not the Council, not humanity, not any species in this galaxy, can ever again claim absolute power. It is the gun on the wall, the reminder that someone is watching, the guarantee that the powerful cannot simply do whatever they want without consequence. Threx studied her face for a long moment. You are not what I expected. No one ever is. That is the problem with expectations. You look at a species and see what you want to see: predators or prey, masters or servants, winners or losers. You never see individuals. You never see the messy, contradictory, impossible reality of beings who contain multitudes. She smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. Humanity contains multitudes, High Mediator. We are the species that built concentration camps and the species that liberated them. We are the species that dropped atomic bombs and the species that banned them. We are the species that enslaved each other and the species that fought for 300 years to end slavery. You cannot reduce us to a single word. You cannot fit us into your categories. We will always surprise you. Threx nodded slowly. I believe you. Good, because the next surprise is coming soon. She turned back to the window. The galaxy is about to become very dangerous. Every species with access to advanced weapons, every civilization with grievances against its neighbors, every faction that sees opportunity in chaos, they will test the limits of this new order. There will be wars. There will be atrocities. There will be moments when you regret ever agreeing to this. And what will humanity do then? Voss's reflection in the window showed her smile fading. What we have always done: survive, adapt, and remind everyone why they should be very careful about starting fights they cannot finish. She left him there, alone with his thoughts and the stars. Threx watched her go, then turned back to the observation window. The Dreadnought hung against the black, silent and patient, waiting for whatever came next. He had spent 12,000 years building a system that was supposed to prevent exactly this moment. A system that was supposed to ensure no species could ever challenge Ryloth's supremacy. A system that had failed, not because it was weak, but because it had forgotten why it existed. The Council had been created to prevent war. Instead, it had created a different kind of violence. The violence of suppression, the violence of control, the violence of telling billions of beings that their dreams did not matter, that their ambitions were threats, that their place was at the bottom. Humanity had not destroyed that system. Humanity had simply shown everyone what it really was. And now the galaxy would have to live with that knowledge. Threx's carapace flickered one last time before settling on a color he had not displayed since his youth. Not copper, not gray, not gold. Something new, something that had no name yet. Something that might, if he was very lucky and very careful, become hope. On the bridge of the Dreadnought, Captain Reyes watched the Council homeworld rotate below her ship. Her crew worked around her, monitoring systems, updating charts, preparing for the long mission ahead. We did it, her tactical officer said. We actually did it. Reyes shook her head. We did nothing. The ambassador did it. The politicians did it. We just sat here and looked threatening. Looking threatening was important. Without us, they would have laughed her out of the chamber. Maybe, maybe not. We'll never know now. She turned to face her crew. But listen to me, all of you. This is not over. This is not a victory. This is the beginning of something, and beginnings are fragile. The Council will test us. The Veth will test us. Every species in this galaxy will test us because that is what beings do when the rules change. They push, they probe, they look for weaknesses. She walked to the center of the bridge, where her crew could see her clearly. Our job is to have no weaknesses. Our job is to be exactly what the ambassador promised, a reminder, a guarantee, a promise that the powerful cannot simply do whatever they want. If we fail at that job, the galaxy collapses into war, not because we lost, because we stopped being what we said we would be. The crew absorbed her words in silence. They had trained for years. They had prepared for every contingency. They had accepted that their mission might cost them their lives. But none of them had expected to win. None of them had expected to survive. And none of them had expected to feel, in the aftermath of victory, the weight of what they had just done. We are not heroes, Reyes continued. We are not villains. We are the species that refused to accept the galaxy as it was. We are the species that demanded something better. And now we have to build that something, every day, for the rest of our lives. She turned back to the observation window. Helm, maintain position. Tactical, maintain readiness. Communications, maintain contact with the ambassador. Aye, Captain. Reyes watched the planet below and thought about the future, about the wars that would come, about the lives that would be lost, about the species that would curse humanity's name and the species that would bless it. She thought about her grandchildren, who would grow up in a galaxy transformed by this single day. And she smiled. Not because she was happy, not because she was confident, not because she knew how the story would end. She smiled because she had done her part. She had stood in the place where history happened and done what needed to be done. The rest was up to everyone else. One standard cycle later. The new council chamber was smaller than the old one, less grand, less intimidating. The architects had designed it deliberately that way, a space for negotiation, not declaration, a space where no single species could claim dominance through architecture alone. Ambassador Voss took her seat at the circular table, flanked by representatives from Ryloth, Thasha, the Veth Empire, and 243 other species. The table had no head, no elevated platform, no position of honor. Just beings talking, trying to build something new. The first order of business was the Dreadnought. The weapon remains in service, Voss said, responding to a question from the Thashan delegate. It will continue to patrol council space. It will continue to serve as a deterrent against aggression, and it will continue to remind everyone in this room that the old ways are over. And who controls this weapon? The delegate asked. Who decides when it fires? Humanity controls it. Humanity decides. But we have agreed to submit to council oversight. If the council votes to censure us for misuse of the Dreadnought, we will accept that censure. If the council votes to remove the Dreadnought from service, we will debate that vote. We are not above the law. We are not outside the system. We are part of it. The Thashan delegate pulsed a skeptical yellow. And if the council votes to remove the Dreadnought and humanity refuses? Voss smiled. Then we will have proven that we are no better than the council we replaced, and the galaxy will have to deal with us the same way it dealt with the old tyrants, through resistance, through rebellion, through the endless struggle of beings who refuse to accept that anyone has the right to rule them without consent. She looked around the table. That is the difference between humanity and the council. We do not claim to be above accountability. We do not claim to be wise enough to rule without oversight. We claim only to be willing to try something new, to build a galaxy where power is shared, where voices are equal, where no species can hide behind tradition or authority to justify oppression. She placed her hands on the table. Will we fail? Probably. Will we make mistakes? Certainly. Will we sometimes be the villains in someone else's story? Absolutely. But we will keep trying. We will keep fighting. We will keep demanding that the galaxy be better than it is. She stood. And that, esteemed delegates, is the only promise humanity has ever made. Not that we will save you, not that we will protect you, not that we will be your guardians or your guides. She looked at each face around the table. Just that we will never stop demanding more. The chamber fell silent. Then slowly the Veth ambassador began to clap. Others joined. Within a minute the entire table was applauding, not in celebration but in acknowledgement of the moment, of the change, of the impossible fact that they were all still here, still talking, still trying. High Mediator Threx, now just another voice at the table, caught Voss's eye and nodded once. She nodded back. The work had begun. And